good evening. Welcome to Thrive, and Misael and I are here together, and we are thankful that you've given us some time on this Wednesday night. I hope that you got to see the video that was released last night about just some staff positions that are coming up in the life of our church, and I do hope that you're prayerful about those things and excited about those things as we are, as our personnel team has worked incredibly hard. Our staff has been in search for these vacancies, and man, we are almost at a completely full staff, and boy, we're excited about that. And thank you for your support, your giving, your serving. We're excited about the next steps of our students, our children's ministries, our pursuits at Calvary, our connections with assimilation. I'll tell you what, the Lord is at work, and we are excited. And so, look, we're trusting the Lord every step, and so thank you for being a part of our church and being faithful. You know, I do want to address one thing that's going to be, it's a challenge, and it's the issue with masks, that we are asking people starting August 16th to really wear masks when you come to church. You know, nobody's going to be policing anybody, we're not going to be kicking anybody out or anything like that, but the reality is, at this time in the history of our world, when it comes to connecting with a lost community, a lost world, it helps us earn the right to share the gospel with people as we put on a mask. And so that's something that is in the forefront of our mind, our call to be ambassadors for Christ. So I want to ask you, look, the political divide is crazy, and there are voices all the way around, but I just want to tell you just from my heart that, and I'll be sending a video next week about this, but I just want to just kind of throw this out at the beginning tonight, that, look, I've had two doctors that are in my life in this community who I've met with, and I respect these men, and that both of these doctors have said, you know what, it's helpful when we're coming together to wear masks. And so, look, I'm not an expert in masks. I have a doctorate, but I will never prescribe you any medicine.
Hey, thanks.
You're welcome for that, Misael. But the reality is I'm not an expert in this, and so I'm going to rely on those that are. And though there's political divide, I believe this will be one of those things that will help us share the gospel with the world, and that takes precedence over anything we do. And so if this can help us share the gospel, then by golly, let's do it. Yeah. So let's be patient with one another. And look, I know there's tensions, but the gospel and the communication of the gospel takes priority over everything we do. And let me tell you something, if wearing a mask will help me share the gospel, then by golly, I'll wear a mask. Yeah. And I would ask you to do the same. Yeah. So now, enough about that. Let's dive into Hebrews 11. Now, Misael,
yes,
I am so glad you're here. This whole chapter that we've been in through this COVID experience has been a step of faith, and moving us to understand faith. Hebrews 11 is where we've been, and we've been processing this idea that the sooner we learn that God can be trusted, the less time we'll waste. And that faith, you see this demonstration of faith through all these characters in Hebrews 11. And I'll be honest with you, you being here has been a moment of faith for me. It's been God answering a prayer that I've prayed since day one. And then I'll be honest, as I prayed it, I'm not sure I could have articulated every aspect of it. But what I want you to take a minute, and I want you to share with the vision that is developing, the vision that God is unveiling for us as we walk this road. Because I know that you're going to preach on Sunday at Owasso. I'm so excited that you're he's going to be preaching on Sunday. Don't miss it. Do not miss it. But I know you're going to share a little bit then. But I would love for you to just share a little bit of that vision that God is putting together.
Yeah. No, that's really good, and I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it. And so as we think of what we're doing, this is a step of faith, right? Because it's almost uncharted waters, because what we're doing hasn't really been seen a lot or any at all in the United States as far as Google knows, because I've tried to Google a lot of stuff. But so really our vision is doing ministry in the context of language. And so really what this looks like is, once again, we're trying to communicate about the greatest King, Jesus Christ, and his greatest cause and his greatest message, and that's the gospel. And so we have to do that in a way people understand, and that's communication. And so if I were to speak another language, trying to share the gospel with Chris, well, he'd be like, what's going on? I don't know what's going on. So I have to speak the language that he speaks. And that's really the small, short, and sweet statement of what we are doing. And so what that looks like practically, in some cases, is that we want to do things in language. And so when you talk about culture, I get the whole culture thing. But I always say, hey, look, I can have some chicken fried steak and you can have some tacos, okay? We can cross that cultural divide. But if we can't use the same language to communicate, well, we're failing. And so the way this works out practically is that our hope and our vision one day in the future is to have another service and more small groups. And these small groups in this other service is in Spanish. And it just so happens to be another language, but we're singing to the same God, we're singing the same songs, we're preaching the same message, but just in a different language. And so this will be both in the Calvary campus, the Owasso campus, and what that looks like. And so it's not just one campus, but it's both campuses, because, man, there's so many Spanish speakers on both sides, whether it's Owasso, whether it's Tulsa. And so really when we think of what we're doing, we want to use this language of we are doing things in English and in Spanish, because I really don't think that we ought to use the language of Hispanic and American. And to be very, very blunt, might as well just say, hey, all the white people go here and all the brown people go here, and the black people, hey, maybe you can go over there. And that's not what we want to communicate. We want to communicate that, hey, this place is not just a place. This place is a home, and there's family here. And it doesn't matter where you come from, what you do and your background, but what matters is that we want to come together and communicate this gospel, and to be able to be edified and challenged and encouraged and equipped in that moment, and also to go out. And so really that right there is what we want to do, is we want to do ministry in the context of language, because that is the avenue in which you communicate the gospel.
And so I think it's important to note that, let me clarify what you're saying, because we're not starting an Hispanic church.
No.
And that's something that I want us to make sure we're very clear about.
Yeah.
Because we're not creating something that is separate from us.
No.
We are part of our church, part of our community speaks Spanish. I mean, if you look around Owasso, even our city of character, they put those signs up in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so we are working to build a church that does ministry in the context of language. Yeah. And one of those languages that's really a large percentage of our population is Spanish speaking. And so Misael's role is not just to go be a separate Hispanic church. No, he's one of our teaching pastors. He just is so much, but he's the best one on staff to speak Spanish. I can speak a little Spanish, but it's bad, isn't it?
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
So I got some work to do. But the reality is, God is moving us, right? To not be a separate church.
Correct.
He's one of our pastors.
Correct. Yeah.
But he speaks Spanish, and someday, soon, we're going to be doing this in the context of language.
Yeah. And I'm glad you say that, because really we want to inject Spanish into our DNA.
Yeah.
We want Spanish to not be something that we do, but who we are. Just as English is not something that we just do, it's just who we are. And so we're not starting another church. One of the campuses is not going to become just a Spanish or just a Hispanic church or congregation. It's just going to be who we are, a bilingual church, and it's just going to be normal.
And to me, I think this is a calling that we have, and to bring this not only to our church, but I think to our nation.
Yeah.
As a calling in this country, and so I'm super excited. It's a step of faith.
Yeah.
And it's been a moment that God has used to build my faith. Now Hebrews 11, I want you to look at it. We're basically in verse 32 and we've kind of been stuck in verse 32 for a little while, but it says, what more can I say? Time is too short for me to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. And then it says, who by faith, verse 33, who by faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the raging of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, gained strength in weakness, became mighty in battle, put foreign armies to flight. Now, the writer of Hebrews said, I don't have time to talk about these different characters, but we've kind of said, look, we got some time. Let's talk about it. Yeah. Let's talk about these leaders. We've gone through each one of these leaders that were listed. And it's interesting because biblically, if you trace them, they're not in biblical order.
No.
But which kind of makes sense, because if you're just writing or speaking, you might not take the time to just necessarily put them in order. Mm-hmm. And so, but he talks about Samuel, and that's an important character for us to consider. Yeah. Yeah. We studied Samuel. We walked through a whole series in Samuel where Samuel was the last judge. We've looked at several judges. He lists several judges, and you remember the time of the judges. We've looked at this, and that cycle. Put you on the spot. Remember that cycle?
Yeah,
so
a whole cycle of really Israel's rebellion, and then they cry out to God, and then God saves them, and they're restored. And there's this time of peace, and then Israel rebels again, and it's just whole cycle.
That repeating that cycle, and Samuel was the last judge.
He is. He's kind of like that transitional judge.
Because he went because after Samuel, you see him go from the children of Israel go from the time of the judges to the time of the kings. Yeah. So then Samuel was the one who brought about the kings. He called out the kings. Saul being the first king, which was a moment of rebellion. Then you see David come into power, and we just walked through that incredible series through the book of Samuel, and I'm so grateful that we went through it. But let's consider Samuel for a second, because what a tremendous leader! It makes sense for him to be listed in this Hall of Fame chapter. Because Hebrews 11 is like the Hall of Fame. It's like the list of guys that really exemplified trusting in the Lord. And when I think about Samuel, there's so many things you could point to in his life.
There's so much.
But I think the big lesson for us in this moment goes back to 1 Samuel 3. Talk about that moment. 1 Samuel 3. You remember that moment very well?
Yeah, I do. Right. So when I think of Samuel, it's so interesting because he's like a product of faith. If you think of
Hannah
if you think of Hannah going and just praying and crying out to the Lord, he is just such a product of faith. And so I think it's so fitting that he is one of the last ones to be named in Hebrews 11 because his whole life just seems to be of faith.
Okay, so this is a good, interesting point.
Yeah.
Because, when you think about some of these men of God that have been greatly used by the Lord throughout history. Yeah. Many of them had moms and dads who trusted the Lord. Yeah. And who pushed them to the Lord. So I think Chad always articulates this. I can't remember exactly how he says it, but he's the wordsmith.
He is such a wordsmith.
He's the wordsmith. But he always talks about, he makes this statement, something to the effect of one of the most important roles that we have may not be what we do, but who we raise.
That's pretty good.
And so the thought of raising our kids, being like our positions, our youth ministry positions, our children's ministry positions are important. Who we raise as a church. This may be one of our most important pursuits in serving the Lord. So Hannah, in Samuel's life, raised a young boy. Remember Hannah, she was barren, she couldn't have children. She said, Lord, if you give me a child. Eli thought she was drunk in that whole moment.
Yes.
And but she said, Lord, if you let me have a child, I'll give this child to you. And this wasn't a flippant promise for Hannah. She had a baby, and then she came to Eli and said, here's my son.
Yeah.
He's yours. He's set apart to
Yeah.
serve the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's what he did.
Yeah. And so if you guys flip over to 1 Samuel chapter 3, you'll land exactly where Chris ended, where Hannah's already given her son to Eli. And what's so fascinating as you look through chapter 3 is that there's a statement that says, in those days, the word of the Lord was rare, and there was not many visions.
Cool.
And so it starts out with this statement of saying, hey, the Lord speaking to people in this type of way was kind of rare. But then you see how the Lord spoke to Samuel just in that way. And so what you have is you might know the story of where the Lord's calling out to Samuel in the middle of the night. And so Samuel thinks that it's Eli. So he goes to them after hearing the word of the Lord. And he goes to Eli, goes, hey, did you call me? And Eli's like, no, you go back to bed, man. And so he goes back to bed and he hears the word of the Lord one more time saying, Samuel, Samuel. Well, Samuel gets up. He's like, Eli, what's up, man? And Eli's like, Samuel, I didn't call you. And so this happens 3 times until the 4th time it happens. And Eli's like, okay, I see what's going on here. It's definitely the Lord calling you, Samuel. So when you hear it again, I need you to say, here I am, Lord. Your servant is ready to hear you. And that's verbatim. We could read it right here. That's practically what he said. And so Samuel goes back and he hears the Lord say, Samuel, Samuel. But if you look closely, it says that the Lord drew near to Samuel. He stood right there next to him, which is so cool to kind of see this image and this picture of the Lord coming close to Samuel right next to his bed and saying, Samuel, Samuel. And so then Samuel goes, okay, Lord, I'm here. Your servant is listening. And that's when the Lord begins to speak to Samuel and telling him just about Eli and what's going to happen and the transition that's going to happen and why it's going to happen. And so it's this moment where Samuel it's almost like he was like, okay, I know someone's calling me, but what's going on? And so it's so cool for him to see little Samuel say or obey Eli, but also obey the word of the Lord, saying, okay, Lord, I'm here. What do you have to say? Yeah.
And that's such a great moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's the foundational moment, because Samuel in that moment began a journey of hearing from the Lord and then doing what the Lord said.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the lesson. That's the big point that I think we all need to take away from Samuel today, is that, first of all, God speaks, and when he speaks, we move. We obey.
Yeah.
We obey quickly. We obey completely. And this is something that's difficult for us, because none of us like to be in that moment where we have to obey. Because we have this tendency to go, I don't want to obey the rules. I want to drive 5 miles an hour over. I want to make the rules not apply to me, right?
Yeah.
We all are that way. But God calls us to obey him.
Yeah.
And it's for our good.
Yeah.
It's for our joy.
Yeah.
It's for our blessing. And Samuel, as a young boy, and remember that moment, it's pretty cool, because Eli finally says, just say to the Lord, what do you want me to do? And God spoke to Samuel, and he told him some really bad news about Eli.
There's some hard stuff.
And the next day, Eli said, hey, you better tell me what the Lord said to you. And Samuel, as a young boy, says, okay, Eli, you're in trouble, and your boys are going to die.
Yeah.
And it's going to be bad for you. And that's bold. But in that moment, if you trace Samuel's life, he was a leader that he kept this listening, attentive ear to the Lord. When I think about us, let's keep this attentive ear.
Yeah.
Let's be listening to the Lord. Listen to the Lord right now in your life. Pay attention. He speaks through his word, through his church, through people, through circumstances. Now, anytime God speaks, he doesn't ever contradict his word.
Yes.
Has there been a time that God spoke to you?
Yes.
Tell me a time.
So the time I can think of right now, which really I can so understand Samuel, where he's like, Lord, I don't understand what's going on, but I just
No, hold on. Is this like Misael said, "Hey, I've got a story in mind in case you put me on the spot."
I do.
So I'm putting him on the spot. Is this the story?
Yeah, 'cause he does it all the time.
Okay.
All right, here's the story.
Put the spot.
So I so get that concept of like, okay, Lord, you haven't called me to understand everything, but you've called me to obey you. So I think of when the Lord called me to the ministry. Okay, I was such a naive little Hispanic man who didn't even know what the call to ministry was. Didn't even know how to articulate it, like a vocational ministry calling. I didn't even know that. Didn't even know you could go to school after high school to study the Bible and theology and philosophy. No clue. Like, I didn't even know what deacons were till my freshman year at OBU. Like, that just shows you. I mean, I went to church, but it was really tiny and stuff like that. So I remember it was such a clear moment for me where, man, I just can't make this up, where I truly felt as I worshiped the Lord that he just kind of like grabbed my shirt or like put a rope around me and said, hey, follow me wherever I go, wherever you go in your life. And I was like, okay, Lord, like, what does this mean? He goes, I just need you to follow me wherever you go. And I was already saved at this point. And I was like, okay, God, what do you mean by like follow you wherever you go? What does this mean? And the only thing that could come to my mind of just what the Lord was telling me and calling me to do to follow him was use all of who you are and all of what you have for my glory. And I was like, okay, all right, let's do this. I said, Lord, I will follow you and I will use all of who I am and all of what I have for your glory in the ministry. And I don't know what that means, but I know that you're calling me to full-time ministry, and I have no idea how to study that and where to go. But I'm just going to do it. I'm going to follow your voice, and I'm going to do it. And it was that huge step of faith for me, because I had no idea what was to come. I had no idea that there is such a thing as OBU, that there is such a thing as studying this, and such a thing as sitting here studying the Word with you guys. And so it was such a crazy moment of faith that I just had to move, really not knowing what to expect or what to do. But the Lord guided me every single step and was so faithful in providing people in my life to help me and to pour wisdom into me. And so that was kind of a moment in my life where I had to truly move without knowing, but had to follow the Lord's voice in that.
I think it's a good story. Good job.
Yeah.
It's a fun story. When you think about Samuel and lessons you learned there,
yeah,
lessons I've learned in my life, the joy and the adventure, the thrill of keeping this attentive ear to the Lord. Keep an attentive ear to the Lord, the Lord's voice. Develop this obedient will to say, God, I will obey you. I will willfully obey you. Yeah. Even when I don't fully understand. And to me, as we live that kind of life, that life, when I think about Samuel's life of impact, of his inclusion in the Hall of Faith, he's a man that sets an example of this attentive ear, this obedient will to the Lord. And that's the call today. That's the message tonight for us. To live our lives with this attentive ear. God, you're speaking, you're at work.
Yeah.
This obedient will that we're saying, Lord, your will be done, not mine. Your will be done. And that's a call tonight. Yeah. That's a word tonight.
Yeah.
That's a word from the Lord tonight.
Yeah.
For all of us. So let's embrace it. I'm thankful for our church. Thankful for you, Misael. I'm thankful for how God's at work. Thankful for Clayton over here doing the video for us. And I'll tell you what, let's be attentive to the voice of the Lord. Let's have an obedient will to the voice of the Lord. All right, Misael, last word.
The last word? I think the last word would be, I really want to encourage you guys to value knowing the Lord in a deeper way. Value that time. Because when I read in places like Colossians chapter 1, where I read that it is the Lord Jesus Christ who holds all things together, and really it is through him in which things continue to exist, And when I read that and when I let that saturate my mind and my soul, man, it's so easy to obey the Lord. When it's like, Lord, yeah, okay, you are so much bigger than I could have ever imagined. You do continue to hold all things together. You are the God in which my mind just is blown and my view of you continues to expand. And so I want to value getting to know you deeper. And it'll be so much easier to move when you call. And so really that's the last word of, I want to make sure that we value that together. And so thank you so much for watching Thrive. We only have a couple more weeks left of this. And so we look forward to next time.
Yeah, and hey, just hope to see you Sunday. And August 16th, we're back to groups on campus. Not every group is coming back. We'll be explaining all those details. But, boy, we're so glad you joined us tonight. And we're thankful to be in your lives.
We'll see you later.